Welcome back to Andertons TV, everybody. I have a very special guest today celebrating a very special birthday. So please, I would love to welcome, it's an absolute honor to meet you, Fred Gretsch, obviously of the Gretsch guitar and drum family, who are celebrating, believe it or not, 140 years in business this year. So Fred, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to meet you. I see you're in Gretsch HQ there, and happy birthday to you.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody who's joining us here in Pooler, Georgia, a suburb of Savannah, Georgia, on the southeast coast of the United States of America.
Well, it's such an unbelievable brand, one of the most important brands, I think, in rock and roll music history. But things go back further than that. So 5 generations of Gretsch ago, I believe, or certainly 5 previous Mr. Gretches. What do you know about how your great-grandfather, whichever one he was, what do you know about how he started the business and what life was like back then?
We know that he came to the United States from Mannheim, Germany, 1872, at the age of 16, and apprenticed at a shop in Brooklyn that made drums and banjos, and then in 1883, 140 years ago, opened his own business. We know he was entrepreneurial in order to do that, and Brooklyn, New York was its own city at the time. It wasn't part of New York City. So when he sailed into New York Harbor, 1872, before the Statue of Liberty, it goes way back, and amazing to think about it.
I mean, what musical instruments were even popular 140 years ago? What was he making?
Yeah, well, of course, marching bands was the popular music of the day for the masses, and drums are an important part of that. And though we made guitars early on, guitars were parlor instruments, and the primary musician with a guitar was a woman at that point in time. So it wasn't until years later then amplification and large guitars came along that guitars became a part of the popular music. So marching music, bands, and in addition to making banjos and drums and guitars early on that were parlor instruments, the family imported a variety of band instruments that went into the marching music and the bands of the day a long time ago.
Now, I suppose your earliest memories of Gretsch would coincide, I suppose, with quite a big musical revolution. You know, the emergence, I suppose, of the electric guitar as, you know, the most popular music in rock and roll. So tell me about your earliest memories of the sort of the scene and how perhaps Gretsch was evolving to deal with that surge or this change rather in popular music.
In the first generation, the founder, very entrepreneurial, had 7 children, and his oldest child, my grandfather, ended up taking over the business 1895 when the founder died suddenly, and so it was Grandpa who built that building in Brooklyn where Gretsch instruments were made, starting in 1916 to 1969. Built that building, he was 36 years old, along with other family members, a 10-story building, still there today, and lots of people pass it and take pictures. Grandpa first took me to the building there at 60 Broadway in the early 50s and showed it to his young grandson where drum making and that was a big ukulele time, early 50s. He died in 52 before the really advent of rock and roll. One of the things I got was a spirit for the business, visiting there, and lived in New York City in Queens, and was able to take the bus. Bus fare back in the day was 15 cents, and take it from my home in Forest Hills to Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and get off at the last stop and walk the 6 blocks to the factory. And so that's where in the middle 50s, the guitar business really started to blossom. A fun recollection is when I visited there in the early 50s. I worked the summer of 58 as the office boy. 1958 is the year in the United States that the accordion business peaked. We'd been distributors of accordions for years and years. So in '58, of course, rock and roll was on the way, but the accordion people didn't expect what was going to happen, and we know between accordion and rock and roll who won the popular music vote over the time. So Chet Atkins in '54, certainly an important transfer point for us to take the hollow body guitars that we'd been making with pickups from the late '30s and continued to evolve them, and solid body jet guitars from the early '50s. And those were the early days, and it was an exciting time to see the business grow. Artist visits and new models come out regularly.
What were you personally listening to at that time, and was there a real thrill perhaps seeing artists that you were really into starting to use Gretsch drums or guitars?
The artists of the day all got play on the radio, and it was a radio kind of thing, and you listen to country radio and rock radio come along later. We're talking about the heyday of Elvis Presley and the very first rockers. I compare notes with Duane Eddy, and I worked that first summer of '58, and '58's the year that he first had his first charted hit. We talk about visiting the UK and who was the first to visit the UK, and I visited the UK in '59, and he toured there in '60, and Mrs. Gretsch joined the conversation and pointed out she was first to the UK in '52. Which is more than 60 years ago now.
It's crazy.
Amazing to be looking back that far.
Duane Eddy, you mentioned there. Do you have any other kind of fond memories of meeting artists at the time, or what was your role within Gretsch at that time?
At that time, a young observer of fast-moving international business, nothing but new music and new artists coming along regularly. 65 years ago, and I was a young man at that time, young lad at that time. So over the 65 years of history, you've had in the entire rock era, every company in the industry has come and gone and grown and diminished. And you had the challenge of disco music in the '70s and the early '80s, impacted the ability of musicians in playing out. But by the time the '90s came around, business was coming back again, and Fender was sold to CBS in 1965, the year that I started full-time at Gretsch. And it was a $13 million sale, which was just amazing. Gibson was sold at the same time, and the business at that point in time was run by my dad's older brother, Fred Gretsch Jr., and he elected to sell the business in '67. I was working there. I was disappointed. It was bought by the Baldwin Piano Company, second only to Steinway at that time as an international company. Long story short, Baldwin owned it 17 years, and my wife and I got to buy it back again in 1984. And guitars had been out of production, and we returned them to production again. And by 1990, the current wave of Gretsch guitar had begun in earnest.
I was told that Chet Atkins and Les Paul had quite a rivalry with regards to the signature guitars that they were having made, obviously Les with Gibson, Chet with Gretsch. Do you recollect any of those conversations? Was there a sense that every time Les put a new feature on his guitar, then Chet would come back to Gretsch and ask for a new feature on his guitar? Or has that story been sort of, embellished maybe a little bit over time?
Of course, over time the stories are embellished. If nothing, that makes them more interesting. And certainly Chet was a tinkerer, an inventor in his own right. He knew what he liked, and he always had a goal to make his sound improve, make it better. So many innovators brought their innovation to him, to Chet. In the case of Filtertron pickups and the Bigsby vibrato, those are things that he recommended highly to us and became a standard part of the Gretsch guitar. So the story that I have heard over the years is when Les first was identified with signature guitars in the early 50s, our team was looking around for an artist, and Jimmy Webster was our artist guy and our designer. And in Nashville, people pointed to Chet. He spent time with Chet and worked out a deal. And we know that Chet also gave Les a call and talked to him about the Gretsch endorsement that was pending. And Les was complimentary about Gretsch. It was off and running from 1954 and has stood the test of time, since the models are still available and still quite popular today. I'm sure you have them in stock in Andertons.
One over my shoulder just there. The other artist, I suppose, that, is firmly front and center of Gretsch folklore is George Harrison. Doesn't get much bigger, I guess, than having one of the Beatles playing your guitars. But did you ever come into contact with George and have anything to do with his playing of Gretsch guitars?
Of course, George attributes his first good guitar to a Jet guitar he purchased in Liverpool from a sailor who had bought the instrument new and at Manny's Music on 48th Street in Manhattan. Ended up selling it to George, and George had that instrument through his life. And everybody looked up to Chet Atkins as a exceptionally gifted player. Not surprising that George would pick a Chet Atkins guitar available at a shop in London and make it his own. We're great cheerleaders for that, but of course we're very happy in February 1964 to see George Harrison playing on television, the first gig in the United States. So it was good fortune that made those things happen. And in later years, we did meet George. Mrs. Gretsch would tell you that she lived in the UK in the 60s and had a chance to meet the Beatles and so many other artists in the day concerts that they had. We connected with George again after the Cloud 9 album came out. Mrs. Gretsch wrote George a letter and thanked him for having his Do-A-Jet guitar on the front cover of that album. And lo and behold, he called her in 1987 and thanked her for the letter and told her about the Wilburys, the band he was getting together, and invited us to meet and work on the Wilbury guitar, which we did. And so we met him several times around that in the United States and in the UK and visited with him at Henley-on-Thames as well.
Amazing. Gretsch guitars, at least, kind of seemingly sort of fell out of favor for a little bit, but at the point that there seemed to be this re-emergence with a sort of a new wave of players. Can you remember anyone in particular that you think, I can think of when I was growing up thinking of seeing Billy Duffy from the Cult playing Gretsch guitars in a fairly non-traditional, he wasn't a country player or anything like that, but there was that sense of it kind of did become cool again in a way that maybe it hadn't been for a period during that sort of, I suppose, 70s, 80s period or whatever. I mean, but can you remember that time of it sort of coming back and who those artists were?
When we bought the business back in '84, a real happening band at the time was the Stray Cats, and Brian Setzer was playing Chet Atkins' 6120 Nashville guitar. His touring and his play of the instrument along with Billy Duffy, two good examples of rock solid players, really enjoyed the Gretsch idiom of hollow body guitars with designs that we developed in the mid 50s.
Is that when you opened the HQ that you're sat in now?
HQ dates to 1991.
Right, so a little bit afterwards.
Yeah. And in fact, Gretsch drums are made in nearby South Carolina, where they've been located since 1985.
Now, I can see some guitars behind you. I don't know if there's some drums, and yeah, I can see some drums as well. Was there anything in there? I vaguely remember when we were talking before, you had one or two guitars that had perhaps belonged to famous artists or been played by famous artists. Was there anything there we could grab to camera just to kind of show people some interesting stuff that you've got?
Over my right shoulder is a couple of custom shop guitars, not owned by artists, but very much dedicated to those artists. The 6120 guitar is an Eddie Cochran tribute model that we made in the custom shop, just a few of, and the original is in the museum Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Then a tribute model to the Duo-Jet guitar that we borrowed from George Harrison's family in order to do a tribute. Those are special models in the collection here, and we probably have a Irish Falcon that was part of the initial run of prototypes that were built, begin production of Irish Falcon guitars for Bono more than 20 years ago now, so time flies.
Doesn't it? Well, so if we go back, sort of, you obviously kept the company under your own sort of direction and leadership until the early sort of 21st century, and then a deal was done with Fender to take over sort of marketing and distribution of Gretsch guitars. What's your involvement now with that arrangement?
Our goal is always to partner with the best, and certainly Andertons has to be on the list of best retailers.
It's very kind of you to say so.
We partnered with Fender in the year 2001 in order to take the Gretsch guitar manufacturing, marketing, and distribution to a much larger worldwide audience. We're 21 years into that relationship, and certainly part of our dream to continue to develop the Gretsch product range, serve a worldwide audience of musicians, music lovers, artists, and fans. So partnering with the best is our way of doing that at an ever expanding level.
I've got here a couple of examples of the guitars that have been released to celebrate the 140th anniversary. There's a 6120 over my shoulder, and then I've got this Chet here. What are I don't know how much your personal involvement was with this, but what are your sort of, why do you think these two guitars in particular have been chosen as the sort of iconic guitars to reissue for the anniversary?
We're talking about a team that works within the environment of the very best guitar company in the world, being responsive to players worldwide. And when you're doing a limited run model, the features that we do on a limited basis, it's a wonderful anniversary celebration to create a limited number of pieces that have unique features and colors. Someone will treasure for both the music and the appearance for a long, long time.
There's a little motif on here of a penguin, and it sort of begs the question of who came up with, penguins and falcons, was that just what they were affectionately referred to by artists, or was that somebody within the Gretsch family who were going, we should call that a penguin, or we should call that a falcon, or whatever?
Sure. The falcon came first. Jimmy Webster was particularly adept at great ideas and great names, and of course around New York City there was a lot of marketing expertise, so we were able to draw on marketing talent that was in the city. And I would just have to guess that since she did the Falcon on a hollow body guitar, doing the Penguin on a solid body guitar, next logical step.
I don't want to do a disservice to penguin lovers out there, but it's not the coolest bird. It's not the name that would immediately come to mind to sort of name a guitar after it, but it's kind of, I think, over the last 50-something years, it's become just another super iconic guitar in, one of the most iconic guitars. I'm guessing it must have been something to do with the black and white color mix of a guitar at the time, but kind of cool, right?
Yeah, well, it's your guess is good as anyone else's. So I like that black and white analogy.
So, what other celebrations are you and the family? I'm gonna move on to some of the questions that we had from some of our the people that follow the show in a second. But what other plans have you and the family got to celebrate the 140th anniversary?
The anniversary product is out there and on the guitar side and the drum side, so it gives individual players a chance to own a special part of the celebration. We've done a 140th anniversary poster as a collector item, newsletter and tote bag, and at the NAMM show back in April, we gave away thousands. Gretsch Night in New York City was in May, a drum event. And if you go to GretschDrums.com, the Gretsch documentary Round Badge Stories is there, and we're working on anniversary events from the guitar side, both in our headquarters area of Savannah, Georgia, and Nashville, Tennessee, where our partners Fender have model shop located, and there's a new shop there. So stay tuned.
I feel like I should apologize to drummers watching. My grandfather and my father, who started the store, were both drummers. My brother is a professional drummer. I'm sure those guys could talk the hind legs off a donkey about Gretsch drums, but I'm a guitar player, I'm afraid, so I'm not the biggest expert on drums. But let's move over to some of the questions that we got from the people that follow this channel. So there's about half a dozen questions here, so I'll give them out to you. Fingers crossed you've got some thoughts and answers to these. But first one, this is a fairly straightforward one from a couple of people have asked this, Andy Cruz and Fonchi Campomar. I hope we got your name right there. But they both want to know, out of all the guitars that are in the Gretsch lineup and have been forever, which was your personal favorite?
Oh, yeah, that's a common question. I really have favorites in the different eras of Gretsch guitars. You just can't have one. Certainly in the 30s, the Synchromatics that we did, and then the early Chet Atkins, early White Falcon, and in the 60s as we expanded the range, stereo guitars, certainly. By the time the 90s came around and we did a bunch of Brian Setzer models that were a lot of fun to do, and so many artist models since.
That's a very, very diplomatic answer.
Never one, always one per era.
Well, this kind of leads me on to another interesting question. This is his username rather than his name. So this is the Southern Fried Alcoholic. It's a great name. But he or she would like to know, what's the craziest idea that an artist has ever presented to Gretsch to do for a guitar? If
there's a craziest, it was probably something we never did. I think the current custom shop, I wouldn't call them crazy, but I would call them inspired individual preferences of mixing up the various special features that we incorporated in guitars over the years. As I see individual instruments come out of there, I quite often say, wow, that's an impressive piece, and I wouldn't call it crazy, but I sure would call it impressive.
Some sort of 12-string stereo Bigsby thing, I would imagine, was, gets it pretty crazy then. So Music Stuff has asked, and again, feel free to be diplomatic with this answer, but he wants to know who your favorite guitar player was that played a Gretsch guitar, or if you'd rather not answer that, just what was your favorite piece of music that was recorded using a Gretsch guitar?
Well, it's easy to pick Chet Atkins, because 1954 to the current era, his music and his instruments are still relevant. It continues to inspire. Chet Atkins Society meets every July in Nashville, and we're heading there next month. He set a standard that is still a high bar for every player.
Crazy high bar.
Whether you want to play consistently in his style or adopt it to your own, well worth taking a closer look.
He's an amazing guitar player. I think you can hear Chet's style in so many modern guitar players. I'm not really of the age to have listened to Chet first time round, but I enjoyed very much listening to the stuff he did with Mark Knopfler. And you can hear again his sort of fingerstyle influence over tons and tons of modern guitar players. So this is probably a harder question to answer, but it's a nice sentiment, obviously from a big Gretsch fan. So this is Travis Niles says, how does it feel to have made the perfect electric guitar?
We can just bask in that as a compliment, and
I guess,
and say thank you very much. One thing we will indeed savor.
We talked a little bit before the interview started about your children, your grandchildren, even your great-grandchildren being full of Fred Gretsches. So what is likely to be the future of the Gretsch Musical Instrument Company? Do you hope that your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will follow in your footsteps and keep the sort of the family connection going?
Well, in this day and age, my wife Dinah and I lead the business, and we're fourth generation. Dinah's in the business 44 years. I started in 1965. You can do the math on that. We've been extraordinarily blessed with long years and good health and a big family. And our oldest daughter is a manager in the business today, and a grandson working with us part-time, and lots of grandkids that have professional careers, and perhaps they'll join us in the business one day, and that would be in the 5th, 6th, and 7th generations. So we partnered in the last years with Georgia Southern University here, part of the university system of the state of Georgia, with Fred and Dinah Gretsch School of Music. So continuing to encourage young musicians and musicians of all ages is very important to the families. It's our goal to see that connection out into the next 50 years, 100 years and more.
Well, I mean, from one family business on this side of the pond to another family business on the other, congratulations again. I hope we do see many more generations of Mr. or Mrs. Gretches at the helm, continuing to innovate and produce amazing musical instruments. But yes, congratulations again on the 140th anniversary. It's some milestone, and thank you so much again for taking some time out to tell us a little bit about the history.
You're welcome, and the Gretsch Museum here in Savannah, Georgia, is in the Plant Riverside district. It's open 24/7. We're speaking today from the Gretsch studio, which is a suburb in Pooler, Georgia. So we hope as people come this way, they'll visit the museum and look us up. The Gretsch 140th anniversary house telegram and poster.
And how do you get one of those?
Swing by the Gretsch studio and pick one up, or your Gretsch dealer.
Well, and I must do that myself one day. It's a beautiful part of the world, so I would love to do that. So thank you so much, Fred. Really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure everyone watching has enjoyed this as well, but thank you so much. And again, congratulations. And thank you for watching, everybody. And we shall see you next time.
Be musical, everyone.